hummingbird, the sunshine and the rainbow, and the rainbow.
Amen. Even for those of us that are new, I'm assuming by now that you can identify the 5 waymarks that we've been discussing. These are the waymarks that are given to us by Ellen White. Obviously, when she speaks about prophecy, about the future, she just has these words. It's very rare that you'll see a graphical representation of what she's teaching. Like the Millerites, when they produced not only these charts, but the earlier ones that preceded these, it becomes very difficult to hide behind your words. Mistakes and the truth both become clearer when you lay them out graphically. That's why I recommend that it's very important to use board work to share your thoughts and ideas. We're given the year 1798 to 1844. We've discussed this 46-year time period. Quite a few times we've looked at this history. She then speaks about the Sunday law, close of probation, second advent. And we've already seen that this Sunday law, we can identify it by another symbol. What was that? The image of the beast. She had been shown that the image of the beast was the great test that all of God's people must pass before the close of probation. So what we have found useful is to overlay upon that information an agricultural model. Once again, when you take these words from inspiration and you put them into a graphical format, it helps you to sort out what is happening. Now, Ellen White only speaks about 3 of these dispensations or time periods or experiences. First one we'll go for is taken straight from the scriptures, Revelation 14. Harvest. Also, the period of the 7 plagues. and Jacob's time of trouble.
Onandre ni Jacob.
It's not that often that Ellen White will refer to this period as the harvest.
Sengen indo watoka namramabanda me ndo ngone ni tata musukiambo.
But she speaks extensively
Wasa wakilihu kwa na vika vetondaku.
about this history, the latter rain.
Wambimbi na buntukutuku ni uda tomuri.
Now, the latter rain is associated with what other symbol?
Sama wakilihu na tukutuku ni uda tomuri kena vi wata kilikile taleso.
The loud cry.
Wata kena kadi bang domuilu.
Now, sometimes we don't think about this in a systematic fashion.
So nangona dasengen indo wakasama taka na bimbi ni kena wakasama taka na bimbi nanda bita wakai tuwa ndo.
But what's called the loud cry
Kai watokai na kadi bang domuilu.
in Matthew 25,
Na maadi wasero sobu kalima.
I think verse 6,
Boteni tikina yono.
is called what?
Watokai medara.
It's called a midnight cry.
Watokai me kadi bang domuilu na bugile tutu.
So we'll put midnight cry here.
Mbite kia na we makwo.
But often we use the term midnight cry to associate an experience with the church.
And then the vabio kanta kai do na tobu nimbula la kurung mai na lut.
And the loud cry with the world.
Na kadi bang domuilu vio kanta ka bating do na kaya do mai burubura.
But they're interchangeable terms in many ways.
Karanya rondo windu teita ki vimbasai.
She also gives us quite a lot of information
Sulevikian de ungasar ni tukutuku.
on this dispensation, the former rain.
Na kena vabio kanta ka batakena uda taumanga.
Now, the latter rain she speaks explicitly about. She defines when it is, the beginning and the end, and what its purpose is.
Uda taumuri pomadal saratina va makailalai na vanda na vi wale so.
What did we say? This is a time period to do what?
Bona ngona ni taradaka.
And this is a time period to
Wawarau kena tarabago.
We also call this preparation 1 and preparation 2
Dua kena wawarau number 1.
because the work of growth, of maturity, is not completed when you begin to work.
Wataka ni viwa matuata ke sembere ni otisar naka ni paidorili orang na kairuango.
So this becomes significant
Do matali akina
when we start thinking about the sealing.
ninda wabio kanta ka watana bindrengati.
Sometimes Ellen White's going to speak about the seal is stamped upon you at the Sunday law,
Sono e pomadal kina banda ni bindrengati paidori vi kenda ni ato mai na lao ni singasani.
sometimes she's going to infer that it's connected to the close of probation.
Kena va visi mai tibata kina somanika tumbani lo.
If we use this concept that the seal is a settling into truth,
Tenda pananan kena wanita kina dina lemo
it gives the concept of a period of time.
wanita kana wakasama bimbingo na kena vio kanita ki kena nonga.
Which is this preparation that's been referred to here.
Se na wawarau rua ka usingi wamadala utitana.
You need to come to a level of maturity
Mai adu mai kinandole ko tangindingan di matua
before you can be harvested,
indar nyota musuh.
before the servants can warrant or state that you are fully grown,
Indar ni rawandi takoran doni bingaradi.
or
Sama tua bahot.
we might say that you are sealed.
Indar ni kan inda sandrengat.
Ellen White doesn't tell you when the former rain begins, by the way.
Sebenarnya mata ko Ellen White ni sa tigu na uda taumanga.
We can see that the harvest would begin after the close of probation,
Dan rede ni tatang suki sangi yado ni sawati na songa ni katumba ni lolo.
You can identify that from Matthew 13.
Rani mandindin tak maya mana mali wasitin katolu.
After rain comes the harvest.
Yoti na uda hangai taravan na tatamsu.
You can also ascertain it from the sequence of the verses in Revelation 14.
Rani watu ni tatalanga moya maina tikina tikwa na watakila wasitin kawa.
After the pronouncement of the third angel's message,
Yoti na kena kadibaki na tukutuku ni katolu ni anglosi.
after it closes,
Ningono sa may songo kina
then comes harvest.
tangai taravan na tatamsu.
So I want to make a point of clarity.
Uga wak matatataki kendor tukutuku.
The movement, not the movement, many teachers in the movement, many Adventists,
Wana kasini wuli ni kavitu ya na itostosobo.
think that the work of the third angel, because Ellen White will say, is to seal and to bind,
Karena naman ni tukutuku ni katol ng ilosi na buku ni kana drengati ka bauvi
extends into the harvest.
hindi awasarea ni kina tatamsu.
So the work of the third angel does not extend into harvest.
Nakakataka ni katol ng ilosi nasanga ni hindi awasarea ni kina tatamsu.
Its work is complete at the close of probation.
No nakakataka ngay may wakatawari na songa ni katumba ni lolo.
You can see that in Matthew 13, verse 24 to 30.
Karena ni revea na mali uchin katolu tikina itolu sa bulu.
You can see that if you went to Spiritual Gifts, Volume 1.
Kena ni volume 1 na spiritual gifts matay ni volume 1.
If you went to the book Early Writings,
Kena early writings.
in all of that material, it's clear to see that the close of the third angel's message precedes harvest.
Ni may matata ni katol ni tukutuku ni katol ni nglosi. Ember ni wawa tukana taki ember na tatamsu.
We don't need to know that information specifically for our study,
Siyang sutsara ni Bibi Menda Kila.
but it does affect the way we conceptualize what our reform line looks like.
Iya araw ni winganiti Menda Kila ni ranianga talaga ko ni da ronita ka na winglay sina reform line.
The reason for that,
Na una
if I were to ask you,
kautarang iko
when is the arrival of the third angel's message? If I were to say in our reform line, many people put it here at the Sunday Law 3A. If you were to do that, the next question we would ask is, where do you put the empowerment of the third angel? Where would you put that? You'd probably end up putting it here, to close the probation. And according to Spirit of Prophecy, it's too late to put the empowerment at the close of probation. It's a big misconception in the models that many people have. The reason why we're falling into this trap is because we don't know how to deal with progression and repeat and enlarge.
Repeat and large patikena progression sena nomu wandi takati kuna vile ni biokan.
And unless you deal with both of those concepts at the same time, you make mistakes such as this.
Nona na sengitora ratiko kina na kena walai wakandundo na vile nyongo na wakabuna na kena na latiko na nomu wala.
So if you're one of those people that think that the arrival is at the Sunday law, its empowerment is at close of probation, and the third angel does some binding work in this history. If you're one of those people who think the third angel's message arrives at the Sunday law and is empowered at the close of probation, and does the work of binding during the harvest, then obviously you can see that your concept of end time prophecy is wrong. At least I hope you can see that it is. So I just mentioned it without coming up with a solution, without discussing it in detail. I just wanted to put that point out. Because as priests, we're living in this dispensation and the third angel has completed its work. Ellen White doesn't tell you when the former rain begins, he just uses it in some generic term. She certainly tells you the end of it. And she definitely does not talk about the ploughing. So the beginning of the former rain and the ploughing have been placed upon this line using common sense, using the agricultural model, extending our understanding beyond what Ellen White will give us. So I'm going to put that in blue, indicating that Ellen White does not speak about that. And Ellen White doesn't tell us when the former rain begins. Hopefully we're all okay with that. So this is where things begin to become a little bit complicated. If you remember the line of history that we had in the bottom left-hand corner, that spoke about Pergamus, Thyatira, Sardis, Laodicea, those gathering and scattering periods from early writings, page 74. And taking all that information and creating a story. So we saw from 1850 to 1863 what is the experience of God's church. What did we identify that experience to be? I can't hear you. Not Laodicea. Not Thyatira. Pergamos. Of course, it's Laodicea,
Hindi na ni Laodicea.
but we identify that this is the experience of Pergamos.
Yan reza na kanibandi hindi na ni sa kwasarangan na kain bulata ko Laodicea.
Followed by
Taraba.
Thyatira.
O Thyatira.
So, in the dispensation of Laodicea,
Nagtabang na Laodicea.
we have these experiences.
Ka urikin na bibaro ni bulaw.
If you go to Spiritual Gifts Volume 1 or Early Writings,
Ngalin na Spiritual Gifts Volume 1 sa Early Writings.
there's a chapter dedicated to this history.
Doon ako sinibola makalatakan na itugutong makango.
What's the chapter title?
Gaba na urutangan ni Ibolmo.
If anybody knows.
Kasi ko na Early Writings na kaya wasin tugutuk.
It's covetousness.
Chapter ni Covetousness. Ko, right?
After covetousness,
Nuit yun
she speaks about the sins of Babylon.
Kawasan na balbal na ni Babyloni.
But this covetousness is an important chapter to read.
Hindi mendawilika, kawilida.
We picked up this word
Nakosanggo
and we changed it to worldliness.
ka wisauta kawalilay me wakabura-bura.
And worldliness
Wakabura-bura
is turning your attention from heaven to earth.
ka kasi nanumbuan na may lumalangit kibura-bura.
And when your attention is turned from heaven to earth,
Di sa makakaya ng tabananan,
you lose the ability to help people to go to heaven.
and bakaileki na nananda rauni bukay rawekanda me rawata na bula balo malangit.
Now I'm going to assert this as a fact. I'm not going to prove it.
Au ganibandi tengo me do na kandina ka mendanangay tobala men da bandi din taksara.
When Moses is born,
Sa sudu mo sese,
what does everybody know?
labar kilala tumat.
They know that the time of the deliverer has come.
Kila ni nonangauna na daw ni bisireki sa gaidan ramay.
There's a prophecy that was given to Abraham that relates to the life of Moses.
Doon na profesya soli bi aparama ka pabio kantaki inananampula Moses.
In fact, there were two prophecies.
Hindi na ni arwa saranga na profesya.
One was 400 years and the other was 430.
Doon na profesya bananro na baki na kerekerua bananro tul sa ulaba.
So those prophecies do not mark the birth of Moses.
Bi profesya oya eseng ni varitek mekina na nasugo Moses.
They mark the Exodus.
Varitek nga nonra sa biu mai ichpita.
So Moses is born
Sugo Moses
when?
no daw.
How many years before?
Kita na baki ni dara.
How many years before? 80 years before.
Also ulan baki.
He kills the Egyptian when he's 40. He goes into the wilderness for 40 years and then comes back. So there's no specific time prophecy for his birth, but when he's born, there's a message. And the message is what? The time is fulfilled. Even though the time prophecy itself hasn't come to its completion. Move to another history. The history of Christ. There's a time prophecy that takes you to what date? In fact, that prophecy is quite detailed. It will take you to 3 dates. 27, 31, 34. 27, 31, 34.
kena tulsa vulkava.
It doesn't mark the date of Christ's birth.
Sengeni pandeita kana ngauna suduki na misai.
But it has the same property, the same nature as the prophecy concerning Moses.
Ia roveo kani wabolek sar kena profesei Moses.
When Christ is born,
Ta sudu na misai
or John,
se o choni
you can make the announcement
ranyo wakarita kana keri tuku
that the time is fulfilled.
isa wapatuka na kena ngauna.
We would mark that as the time of the end.
Enda na tonga ya me ngauna ni wakatao tio ti se time of the end.
So you jump forward to the Millerite history,
Da landisar kina ngauna ni mila.
and the Millerite history does give you a time prophecy for the beginning, the time of the end.
Na tukutuk ke mila solivikia da ngauna don ena kena tigu kina na le ni mila.
You have time prophecies for the middle,
Tigo na kena ngauna profesei na le ni loma
and also one for the end,
kena wakatao tio.
1844.
Ko alu wasa vulkava.
So we have three witnesses
Da kuneki na ni tolu na dina
when God is going to gather his people,
na songo ni reme non tamata na kalo
whether it's a story of Moses, Christ, or Miller.
se na laini nei Moses tisu ser mila
It's connected to the concept or the principle of time.
ba bio kan te boleh sare na kami balata na ngauna.
When God's people are going through this history,
Dira la kuduru mana tamata ni kalo na tambang ngauna ngoka
if this was 44,
ka ngo ti ko alu wasa vulkava
what's the experience that they're going through here in this dispensation?
maro ni bulan na bar la kuduru mati ko mai na niu ti mai na wasa vulkava ti ko alu wava
Scattering. What number?
meni bise
This was scattering 2,
bise ki number 1
because she's going to say God is going to gather his people a second time.
tigo ni na songo ta na kalo na tamata na kalo ni ngauna.
Going to put this in blue.
Na tonga na peni karkarawa
It was God's will that they would be gathered.
na nona le wana kalur nange songo di batal mai
Does that happen?
ya do beko ya
No,
se
it doesn't happen.
nya
For them to be gathered,
mer songo di batal mai
what would they need?
ta bar mindreo
New what? New light, new laws, new rules. Something new has to happen.
rara mo bo kene tubu bo
We get to October 22nd, 1844.
na mai na korsul korena butova tinkawal baba
What were we told that George Storrs believed at that point in his experience?
ramen de kila mbaleti George Stores na rara maningona
What did he say about his past experience?
na vai tukuno ko mbaleta na pika donia na ngona nimbero ya
The message of time,
tuku ni ngauna
what did he say about that?
aba wasakino kwa
Remember what Sister Brody taught us?
aba data weekend our sister Brody
Is it good or bad?
dina se da
It's bad.
da
He called it mesmerism.
watoka kwa mesmerism
We call it hypnotism.
da tukuno kenda na wasame kana vesumona
He was hypnotized
vesumona taki
by all of this information on this chart.
na be tuku keda ka tiko na chai
First, William Miller hypnotized them,
matai ni ngona vesumona tai ko William Miller
and then Samuel Snow reinforced that hypnotic experience.
be vandi ta ka semon snow na vesumona
So there was one person
do na tomata
having experienced October 22nd,
kas la kuduru manapula ni korsul korena butova
says,
ko alu baba
said all of that experience was wrong.
Paro ni bula kene ai dala.
When you have that perspective,
Tiku weekend na rayo ya.
you reject time
Inda Siya nga ni wambota si bilinga levi na wambota ni ngauna.
what will happen to you?
Dabe ada bikyan.
You'll be scattered.
And visyak
Now, there are other people
sotale na tamata.
who wouldn't let go of that time,
Ra turma tuatip nga na tukutuk makawan.
but nothing's happened.
Siya ni norkasi ako.
So, what will they begin to do?
Nadabar nangay rakaw.
They'll begin to recalculate.
Nangay tarawi rumera taka na kena wando nuta kinanora sakana prosay.
And they'll get the fulfillment of those prophecies and push them into the future.
Dito na wapatukan ka din prosay ya kara lebita sara na lain.
The re-time set.
Era bisun takatale na ngauna ni itubutu ni prosay.
If you were to re-time set in this history,
Yung dabi vator na kangwa mendo bisun takina tubutu ni prosay ni kanala indun.
you're going to be rejecting something.
Anda sa kanda siya nga di baka mauti ko na tubutu dina. Ya pek.
The Millerite history obviously goes back,
Tubutu mila da listele van muri.
1798.
Yusan ulkawalu.
So if I were to draw this line here,
Mundur ta na lain go.
what is this arrow a symbol of?
Dabe bata kilikila ta kana na lain go.
That brings you to October 22nd, 1844.
Ako tiketa mai kina karso bukaron ko to tin kawan wasang bukawa.
What experience is that?
Mula ta bendo ni mai na wala.
Sorry? It's the gathering.
Aso bodi bata mai.
All of this is the gathering.
Beto to ko na tin ka bitu bisu.
So if you come here,
Na to mai ke
it's this midnight cry message.
sa kadile kage na bogi le tutu.
So the midnight cry message brings you to October 22nd.
Kage na kan bang dumule mo bogi le tutu ko tiketa sar mai kina karso bukaron ko to. Tin kawan wasang.
So someone like Stores,
Ndu bata kana turon ko stores.
who rejects the experience,
Pues siya ni wakambota ka kalira kalebi na wakambota ya.
rejects the midnight cry.
Ka siya ni wakambota na midnight cry.
Someone like Miller or his associates,
Do kay mila kay na na lensong songo.
Miller doesn't do this himself,
Siya ni takawala nga mila.
but the people who followed him
Ira nga no muri ko bodi.
and people who went in their own direction,
Ira nga kay tosile may na tos to siya.
they begin to reset time,
Ira nga bibi so takatalawir na ngona ni prosay na.
which means they reject the midnight cry.
Balbalya ni ra siya ni ngo man tukutuko ni midnight cry.
So in this history,
And I tabala nga ngo.
if you try to recalculate the 2300 days or you reject it,
Kapag fika takatali siya takatali ngauna ni prosay ni Fernando tularo ng baki siya siya nga ni dingo man na dina.
then you reject the midnight cry.
So siya nga talaga ni dingo man.
So, fanaticism enters into the movement here, and Ellen White's going to begin to address and deal with this subject. She says no time setting. She continues this message through this history, the history of the scattering. You get to 1850 and the gathering begins. As soon as that happens, Satan has a meeting with his fellow angels. And they know what's about to happen. And they have a strategy, a plan. You can read that in early writings. And the strategy is not to destroy our belief in the Bible, but it's to distract us from our mission. In the gathering, one of the key characteristics is the subject of time. He knows that,
kila tiko setani.
And he wants to distract us
Ka sanga po me wangoli kenda tani.
from studying God's word
Ano da buli da na pasini kalu.
and understanding what the next time event will be.
Parminder ni kila akambimbi tiko mai eliu.
All of this story leads us to one conclusion.
Na tawanongo kauti kenda sana mai ndo na kena viva nitak.
The Millerite history doesn't finish in 1844.
Tukutu kemila sengani mai oti sarana bakitin kawan basa mukawa.
God had not finished with his people.
Sebenarnya watawarna kalau na nonita bibir na nonatamak.
This one chart was not enough.
At walingango sesengani tawda ko sara.
For one thing, it only contains the first and second angel's messages.
Tiko kina na tukutu walingani matay kana karoni glosi.
So they had to give additional information for the third angel.
Kando don mera dito talisyon tukutu membalata na katuli ni glosi. Atiko na kana karoni cha.
And then they had to give information on the sanctuary message.
Atiko na tukutu may na walitang.
So there was still a work for them to do after 1844.
Kotondo na takataka mera waidora niyo tinatin kawar basa mukawa.
And what the Millerites didn't realize,
Kar sengani kilandi wakiti to na milray.
that Christ had never planned to come to earth at the second advent in 1844. That was never his plan.
Ka sengani tuwan ni Messiah mele sumai ki burura na tin kawar basa mukawa.
It's easy for them to know that if they had studied carefully.
Na raw sargar to mila mer to kilawaya ke bakar to uli da sarga na kana profesai.
So their misunderstanding,
Nonra sengani kila di waksara
they would need to do what?
da ba ngandra ba mera takar.
Like Daniel 9,
Kana tanya lawa se diwa
they'd need to repent of those mistakes.
mera be mutunita karna nonra da ba.
Now this is really easy to see.
Raw sarga kenda men da buli.
First angel's message says,
Tani tukutu ni anglo se tukuna.
the hour of his judgment is come.
Sa to may nonangaw na melawa.
Third angel's message says,
Tukutu ni katoli anglo se kaya.
don't receive the mark of the beast,
Kuni odingo mana watakil kilin man mano.
lest you be punished or judged.
Diyaw nangay tutungi tayo kalaway kina.
So both messages address what issue?
Prone tukutu ko ya na ba tukuna ti kumay bikyan.
The issue of judgment.
Baleta nanda vilaway.
And the mistake that they had made
Nandala era takama.
is they didn't understand what those judgments were.
Para siya ngani kilang diwa kinanda bana vilaway shot yo ya.
Particularly the judgment of the first angel's message.
Pag bimbi na vilaway yan tukutu ni natin English.
Fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come.
Rere baka nakalong suliwan na langi-langi. Isa may nanangaw na melawa.
That judgment was never dealing with the executive judgment or punishment.
Vilaway ay siya ngani siya matiko kina vilaway level na executive judgment.
Which is what's being dealt with in the third angel's message.
Kamay tiko na kaya itugutukoy na tugutukoy ni Katolik ng English.
Third angel's message
Tugutukoy ni Katolik ng English.
here
Mo
says, don't receive the mark of the beast,
kunin din ko ma na watakil man manu
which is connected with the image of the beast.
kasi matitigo ba na watakil man manu.
Because if you do,
Kaya kaya ba ko ya?
then in the harvest,
Yan ang una ni tatamsuki.
one of two things will happen.
Dua si Rona kaya na.
If you didn't receive the mark,
Ka siya ni dingo man na watakil kila.
you'll be bound into bundles and go to the heavenly barn.
Ka na wawdi baka na sona sila si roda.
If you did receive the mark of the beast,
Kaya ka dingo man na watakil man manu.
you'll be trodden down like grapes and your blood will pour out of your body.
Ka na butung gandi mbrondo levi na ndra menengum.
That's the judgment of the third angel.
Kaya na bilaway ni Katolik English.
His message ends when the punishment begins.
May dawati ko na kaya itugutuko isa na una ni raraw.
The first angel's message is different.
Tugutuko ni matay ni English dui.
The first angel's message deals with another type of judgment. The Millerites should have understood all of that information. Just so that we understand this clearly, this is the arrival of the third angel. And this is the empowerment of the third angel. We need to understand that when we deal with the subject of scalability or fractals. I'm stating some of these things as facts without explaining them, so if you don't understand them, don't worry about that. They're just pieces of information that you need to have in the back of your mind. So this gathering period here, this will be the work that God's people are going to come together, begin to share the message with the world in preparation for the second advent. We know that it was God's will that Christ was to return in the lifetime of the Millerites. The delay was not his will. 1888 should never have happened. All that history was a result of this rejection of the work that God had instructed his people to do. Because they go into a Laodicean condition, 1888 must happen. So somewhere in this history, it was God's will that the subject of time would be reinvestigated. And that's exactly what began to happen. Higher medicine began to do studies on time. But because the church is in a Laodicean condition, those studies were never completed. The whole project failed. His studies didn't go anywhere. And the church goes into captivity. For 126 years. And for 126 years, we've been preaching a message about an event that we really know nothing about. The Sunday law. And one of the most important things you need to know about that event is when it's going to happen. If you went to Revelation chapter 2, we look at the experience of God's people in the history of Thyatira. Begins verse 18. We'll read that. Oh, you're not going to read, or you don't read it? You don't read it in. Okay. Go read verse 18.
Wili ka na tiki na tini kawalu.
Unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, These things say the Son of God, who hath his eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass.
The angel of Thyatira
Nangilo si may Thyatira.
is the leadership of Thyatira.
Siya ko nanguna ni Biliutaki may Thyatira.
So as we read through these verses,
Dawili ka na be tiki ni Walango.
we're going to see that the leadership of the church in this dispensation,
Darita na Biliutaki ni Songolotu may natambango na ya.
they do some good things in verse 19, but in verse 20 it identifies a problem. Because the leadership of the church, it allows Jezebel, who's called a prophetess, to teach and seduce the church, to commit fornication. A church, the people of God, are identified as a woman in Bible prophecy. If they commit fornication, who will they do that with? They do that with men, obviously. If you went to Revelation 17, we read this verse before. 17:2. 17:2. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. The last part of verse 1. I will show you the great whore with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Revelation 17 verse 1 and 2. So if you come back to Revelation 2:20, if the people are committing fornication, they're doing it with the people of the earth. If we're okay with that point. She teaches us to do this, and she seduces us to do this. We know who Jezebel is. She's the high priestess of Bel or Baal. It calls her a prophetess. What is a prophet? Someone who prophesies. If I said it's going to rain today, does that make me a prophet? No. A prophetess or a prophet is not talking about just predicting the future in any normal way. It's not doing it in some kind of historical fashion. It's doing it at a religious or a spiritual level. Her job is to prophesy. So when she teaches and seduces, what is she teaching us? She's teaching us, she's giving us some instruction about prophecy, isn't she? So in this history here, Thyatira, the church leadership, the angel of Thyatira,
Nangilosin ki dataira.
has allowed Jezebel
Sa mga taray chespeli.
to teach us prophecy.
Kabaka bulivikan na profesya.
Are we okay with that?
Sa toro ti ba?
Not only is she going to teach us prophecy,
Sa wala nga nila bulivikan na profesya.
what else is she going to do?
Dapat talan na kabakwa.
It's like a dating agency.
Napakati ko doon na kamero. Babi mo siya kitagin na doon na tangan kinala.
She's going to introduce us to some men,
Baka takilikan da why so natural.
the world.
Si buru-buru.
So this is this worldliness
Ako na mula ba buru-buru go.
that we spoke about
Kada bital mo taka.
in this concept here, Laodicea.
Ano ba kasama baka mula maliw siya.
So the fornication with the kings of the earth,
Nabi buto ko di ba tikay na tuwi kay buru-bura.
with the world,
Wata kay buru-bura.
is the Laodicean condition.
Tutu ni mula maliw siya.
So there's this Laodicean condition running through this history,
Lako turbo ti unatambang unandare ti manapapa buru-bura.
but she's also going to teach us prophecy.
Karena baka buli da bikan na profesya.
Now you can imagine what kind of prophecy she's going to teach us.
Nabi baka sa mata kana matagali profesya wala ba na buli da chispel bikan.
A false prophetic message.
Ndo na profesya lasu.
Now, who is Jezebel?
Ode yo chispel.
At one level,
Nandun na makatangin na hindi.
we can argue that it's the papacy,
Narani yung sa akin yung kaya baka na papacy siya kaya na
but in Revelation 17 verse 5, 17 verse 5,
patakilawa siya tinikabitu tiginalima.
she's called a mother.
Patokay ko may tina
She has daughters.
katu nalubian na ilaw.
Those daughters collectively are Protestantism.
Kuwera nalubian na ilaw era lotu protesting.
They're harlots,
Era daw tangani
it says in the verse,
tigo na tikina
therefore they're in apostasy,
kaya kina era tigo na lotu bibatalay.
whereby we get the term apostate Protestantism.
Ada may kina na tukutukan ni doon na lotu sa bibatalay.
So we're being taught here
Dapat tabuli deke
in this 126 years,
nandun na rin sa bulka ono na mbak yung go.
apostate Protestant prophecies.
Na bi profesay lasu bunga nangon ni bibatalay ya.
Now, this prophecy that we're being taught,
Na bi profesay ko ka tabuli deke na
this prophetic message,
na tukutukan ni profesay go.
is in the history of Thyatira,
Tiko na ngon na ni sokosobolo to ay kay.
which is a scattering.
Ngon na ni bisaya.
And where did we see Thyatira in its original setting?
Kana buloy ben dari di ay kay kina na ngon na kani tutu makaw.
Back here
Lesu tali may murisa.
in the 1260.
Na ngon ni buto-buto ni Roma kalut.
Now, we spoke about the great light in that history,
Daray na takinimbulan ngon na
and after the Reformation,
niyo tina ngon ni bibara ramataki.
which was built upon what principle?
Kabakaya butaki ando na yabu.
The principle of education.
Na yabu ni buli.
If you recall that, I made that connection.
O siya mata-mata na bakasama ya.
What was the problem with the Catholic Church?
Napa na tulang kana bulan ni lutu baka tu.
Its priesthood.
Saya kuan na kami balata na bete.
What was their problem?
Napa na non relang.
They were uneducated.
Era siya ngani tomata buli.
They could never beat the Protestants in an argument, in a debate.
Siya nga ni pakanduan ni rando nganga. Nandun na bigleti kaya pakandu bimbata nandun na kami balata tugu-tugu ni kalu.
They have a plan, a strategy
Sarang kay tuwa na rin doon ay tuwa-tuwa.
to fight against the Reformation.
Naravoluta na bibara ramtaki.
It's called
Waktu kay
the Counter-Reformation.
doon na bisa kasangka, may sanggatan na bibara ramtaki.
And who are the people that are the premier in that warfare?
Oke, urna tamata ra bilu tagi kweli na ngoni bi nadalaga.
The Jesuits.
Urna Jesuits.
These are the Jesuits who are going to fight against the principal ideas that were developed during the Reformation.
Gol saranga na urna Jesuits karena bito may tuloy tulo-tulo meravoluta na bibara ramataki sa tanromay na muna.
Those principles
Nabi ya boya
that warfare was successful.
Vivoluti mainganga
Protestantism becomes corrupt.
na lutu protestanti sangai mai vivalai sarabon.
Revelation 17 verse 5
Pagkakilawa sa tin kami tutukin na lima,
is not this history,
siya ni kwenta tambang urong biseti mo,
or this one,
siya po mo,
or this one,
siya po mo,
or this one.
siya po na kanatara.
Revelation 17 verse 5
Pagkakilawa sa tin kami tutukin na lima,
is in this history.
siya po ay tiko na tambang urong nanggo, pupulaan mo.
The daughters are already harlots in the 1260.
Nalubi na lewa sa dotangan ni Boli, manangon ng buto-buto ni Roma Bakalot.
If we follow the story that we are telling,
Hindi ko kumuri may na talano tuwiyo si Tigano.
how did the Protestant churches go into apostasy?
Era may badalay bada bakara lakutu na lutu bagulilasu. Era lutu ba protestante na muna.
Whose fault is that?
Ade mbali wa.
The Jesuits.
Era Jesu.
Counter-Reformation.
Ambra bisang sama tan bibaro lang ta.
So that apostasy that the Protestant churches enter into
Kwa na bibadalay akara lewa na tu na lutu protestante.
one of them,
Doya
if I can say it that way,
orlikamo
is free of that error.
kamo ngalalamay na tano ya.
At least they have the potential of being or of escaping from that error.
Hindi na niti ko endo na tubo-tubo ni Rani ang rota ni may nabibadalay ya.
So these are the churches of the United States.
Gua na li sungu-sungulo tu may na kuno Amerika.
Sardis
Sariti
has a name that they're alive, but their works are dead.
sa kwa na Rani bulo bolo tu ni bulo boli ya kena kata kaya sama.
So they have an opportunity,
Ti ko endo na ng sala
but we see it ends up in failure.
kamay tini tu na lera kena buka.
So there's going to be a struggle in the church during this 46-year history.
Kana do endo na pisibiraki na tambangon ng biseti mo.
Miller's going to say,
Kana dito puno mila
the time is fulfilled,
sa may babatukan na kena ngauna.
and the Protestant churches are going to fight against him.
Ora lutu protestant ya nangay iboluti kwa sa sangaki kwa.
Why will they fight?
Laban ko na naga bisa sa kasi boluti kwa ke.
Because they were taught
Bakit niya rabah tawuli
and seduced
kabe sumona taki
by Jezebel
may biches peli
in this history here,
ina tambangon mo
and they have held on to some of her teachings.
kara tori baka balu may so na kana wakta bubuli. Class.
There are three teachings that they're going to hold on to.
Tul na ibang bubuli yar na skota batiti kumay.
Adventists know of two of them.
Kilala lutu ni kabitu na erbuan biura ya.
If you go to 4SP,
Buka wala ko ina 4SP
page 235,
rami pepa ruan 25
4SP 235.
Maksudnya yang 4SP 235 ruan 25
This is Spirit Prophecy Volume 4.
Ali Prophesy Volume 4 Spirit of Prophecy Volume 4
The title of the chapter
Utangan ni lesson ko
is The Second Angel's Message.
karuan itu yang Diyos.
The doctrine of the natural immortality of the soul
Na bakit tayo pumuli ni kaya na mulati ko nga nayalo ni sama tinatamata.
has opened the way for Satan to do a powerful work.
Dola ba yung doon na ngumisala may baga resenta niyan doon na daka kukusa.
And he does it through modern spiritualism.
Kaya da ropa na so na prophesy ni ngauna kasanda wandi ni tatibo darungaga anda wilika na itukutuku enangono.
And this is in addition to the papal errors of purgatory and praying for the dead.
Kasi matimay so na babubuli mga lutu katolika ni sala ko na yelo ni doon tamata kinabunwa ko pura katarioti purgatory
Praying for the dead
do masula kinayalwan.
and also asking the saints to help you.
Kando kiri ka na masunar na katoliko ya, be buki kendar na ron ra sa mati tu. Ana ba kamboto ba katoliko.
And obviously, the idea of eternal burning hell.
Kena baka sama ni ato tu na bukawanga kamatau mundu maye.
So one of these errors that were taught in this history
Ka sona dala ka baka tabuli na tambang ng boka.
was the immortality of the soul.
Kena bula tip na yalo ni sa mati na tama.
Even more dangerous,
Ka dora ka rer bakisara.
even more widely held,
Kando baka bauti tu baka lebu.
was the assumption that God's law was destroyed at the cross.
Ni sa may baka rusay sa baka uti na bunaw ni kalu. Na rubin kobil tayo may kalibari.
They took this from Colossians chapter 2,
Rakota may na pagkasamongo may na kolosa waserua.
where Paul says they took the ordinance and nailed it to the cross.
Karena taura na bibunaw ya ka bakota kina kobil tayo.
Therefore, Jezebel taught God's people
Nabuna ka bakatabuli da kina o chespeli vera na tamate na una.
that the Sabbath is no longer binding
Kasi ni bibuaw vitali na singatabuli ko.
and we should worship God on the resurrection day.
Kando doon menda karaba na kalu na matay ni singantu dari tali singasani.
Sunday sacredness,
Kana batamboy na singasani.
because the fourth commandment was nailed to the cross.
Niaba ko tinang kobil tayo na kawani na.
So the doctrine of immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness,
Napakahuli ni kanambula chip nga na ilang tamata ni sa mati.
these are,
Pagkatamboy ni singasani.
these are two of the doctrines or the works that Sardis is holding on to.
Goy ron ni pagkahuli ka may toro politiko na soksogolog to sari.
If you're familiar with the Millerite history,
Kaya pagkao kilandi politiko na tugu-tugu ni Mona ni Milay.
you'll see that both of those doctrines were dealt with by the Millerites.
Kila ni Rona tugu-tugu ni utang roya. Ito may ndiw da binakasarang Mila kay nananilaw.
One before October 1844 and one after October 1844.
Dua mimbar na Okotoba watin kawal wasang lupa. Dua ni sa mayuti na Okotoba tin kawal wasang lupa.
Ellen White speaks about a third doctrine,
May wasa ti ko lang way na total katulo ni Wambauta.
and many Adventists are not aware of this one.
Buka sarabi kan dan alo tini kabitu na ledabati ko na biba balayong.
Which is strange
Biba ko muita sa balibu.
because Ellen White says this was the prominent doctrine.
Kana maramalan way. Yung kwasarang ko ito na urutan ang bimbin dan menta kilar na.
Prominent among these false doctrines,
Dere ti ko na biba buli la sugo.
doctrines of the papacy,
Paguguli na papacy na pamawalo.
is that of a temporal millennium.
Balikan ti ko ito na bakit doon doon.
Temporal means earth,
Na temple akin balambala ura-ura.
millennium means 1,000 years.
Na millennium akin balambala doon na ba.
A temporal millennium here on earth,
Doon na doon bule buru-buru bo men doon na baki.
1,000 years of spiritual peace and prosperity,
Na tiko kina doon na baki.
in which
Bakit mo bakayalo kina bula sa utu.
in which the world would be converted before the coming of Christ.
Na may pamatali ataki. Na kay buru-buru kaya ni berni le sumay bukaron na siya.
So this doctrine is being held onto by Sardis, by the Protestant churches,
Na babuli bo may dingo makabambo to sariti. Patikir na lotu protestante.
there are three issues:
Tuluti ko na kambimbi
temporal millennium, immortality of the soul, Sunday sacredness.
bula na doon lang baki. Berniwarak nilis waro may ni Chisu. Patikir na ruwa ka sa tulio sa kyotikin.
So the prominent doctrine
Na Iwa na lay bimbin doon tiko beretul to sa may tarango.
that Miller is going to fight against,
Kabambo tini na voluto Mila.
he's going to say the time of the second advent is now.
Ni ngona no nalis wa ka rumay Chisu sa kwasar tinga na ngono.
And the churches are going to say what?
Matawar nang kay kawer na lo.
Christ is not about to return.
Siyempre ni siya nalisumay na Kristo.
There is no time.
Siya nga nindo na kaya nangauna.
We're going to have 1,000 years of peace before Jesus comes.
And then ala ko mo talang wal don na dunong dulo ang bagi.
So this doctrine of no time
ni siya siya na nangauna.
is developed in the history of Thyatira,
Ka ate ko may na susugulo to tayo.
which is the scattering.
May na muna ni bise akiwa.
And in the gathering,
Namo ni wiwasong ko di matalamay.
the subject of time is introduced.
Saan kay may bandi tektal na itutuk membaleta nangauna sa prophecy.
So when we come to the history here of Thyatira,
Alam ko may na kita bango na tayo.
because of the subject of covetousness that's introduced here in the 1850s,
Malata na utangan ni koko ka may watabuli ni wali ni natambango na ni kinkawalo ni sa mulu.
Satan knows that there are certain things that we're going to accept and certain things that we won't accept.
Kay kilato siya tayo siya na ibabulin na naging goma siya na siya da goma.
Like the Jews,
Lebo kay rachiu
he's happy for us to keep Sabbath.
maraw tipo siya tayo di na maroray na siya tamo.
Because keeping Sabbath
Balata ni ka na maroray na siya tamo.
turns you into a Pharisee.
Bukili ka na Paris.
You become legalistic.
Na beatur bang bimbi na kena pika na wakalawa.
And in that legalism, you think you're doing God's will.
Da turi baka me baka ndo na lawa.
And therefore, it becomes a peace and safety message.
Sa me baka ndo na tukutuku ni viva vingwin.
In addition to that,
Kasi mati bata
we talk about the resurrection.
angay mo tam na tukutuku ni Yesu tu da kita na mati.
Because we've become Pharisees, not Sadducees.
Baka ndo sa na may Pharisee kasi ni urna si toki.
We believe in the resurrection of the dead,
Sa na may bamboto tu ni na rani ratu da kita na mati.
which means we resist and fight against the concept of immortality of the soul.
Kanda may boluta na bauta ni bulatale na yun ni tomate na mo sa mati.
But what happened
Kami yado
is that we never entered into this gathering period.
da siya nila ko rumah na ngoni sobo ni mato mo.
It never happened.
Siya niya.
So the scattering
Ngoni bisiaki
has continued all the way through this history.
ya tumani bol tu nga na tabang na me ato na tin ka di over sobo ka di.
And Ellen White's message
Tugutugo ni Ellen White
of no time setting
kaya na siya ni Bibandi tektal na bimong na ni Max.
has continued all the way through this history.
Bito man ni sarto nga may nang tabang na tin kawalo sa mo. Nalaman natin kali over sobo ka di.
So her call
Non na kadio kwa
to not time set
nakakoy ni bakandita kindo nga una.
for specific issues, specific reasons,
Na una nibibandita ki kinabuni ka na bandita ki bola.
in addition to the apostate Protestant perspective of no time,
Menon rin tukutuku na loto proteste di sana makalay tu ni sasa ni Renindo na ngona ni prosay bandita ki.
of the temporal millennium,
Sina tukutuku ni do na ngona ni donong na empati na baba ko kana tayo na ngoni prosay.
Has-
Tinalis waromay.
has led to a situation that the church no longer knows when the Sunday law is going to come.
Sa baka muna may tuwid doon na wakasama na leon nilo ni kami tulis waromay ni siya wasara na nalis waromay chisu.
The doctrine is so embedded, so ingrained in us,
Nababubulia sa may baka may tigitu ni nanda pangmauta.
that we believe we will never know.
Baka sa anda dito na pangmauta ninda na siya ni kalandi na nalis waromay chisu.
That God will never reveal this information to us.
Kana siya ni bata kilamay nakalu na profesebo.
So this Laodicean condition
Nitutu ni bula bakalete siya ko.
is not about dress reform or health reform or country living.
Siya ni balata na kani dress reform, siya country living, siya utala reform tali so.
We know it's not,
Dakila ni siya.
because the church was given all of this light,
Bata ni asuli nararama wana lotu,
generally accepted the light,
ka lingwa mana raram go,
but was still in the Laodicean condition.
yang yaga me bula tu balete siya.
The Laodicean condition,
Na bula baka leo ti siya,
the message to Laodicea,
na tukutuku ka lako tala na belete siya,
is a prophetic message
ndo na tukutuku de prophesy.
that we need to understand
Kadundo no menda kila ka sartina,
that the second advent of Christ is imminent.
ina lesu bako romay tisu, wakati tekti.
And it's a lack of understanding on that subject,
Na laylay nanda kila ka na utang mo,
which basically means you stop looking to heaven and you look to earth.
ka wapalbal tekti ni sanda siyang rin naman tuwa na kalugay ko may lumalang.
This is
May ray ko may burubura.
This is the Laodicean condition.
Kwa siya nga ko na mula baka leo siya.
The Laodicean condition
Mula baka leo siya.
is the subject of no time.
Uno talaga tiba di sa siya natalin ni doon ng aura.
Someone asks you when,
Wandi ka.
what do you say? We don't know. This is what this condition is. In 1989, that condition changes. From that moment, what do we teach? Fear God, give Him glory, for the time of His judgment is come. When we say the time of His judgment is come, what are we talking about? What are we referring to? Obviously we've got time and we've got judgment, but what are we referring to? Sorry? So someone said the 7 last plagues. And someone said the first angel. Obviously it's the first angel, but I want to know what it's referring to. He stands here, the first angel, and he's predicting something. What's he predicting? Judgment. So what is that event? My brother says the 7 plagues. So let's go back. Here it is, the first angel. He says judgment is coming in 46 years. And what's going to happen in 46 years? The investigative judgment. 1989, the angel says, what judgment? The investigative judgment is the first angel. Come back. The angel said, in 46 years, it's the judgment, the investigative judgment of whom? Now you get it. Of the dead. What's he going to say here? So this angel points to October 22nd, 1844. This angel points to what waymark? It's not Daniel. Oh, sorry, what did we say? 9/11. It's not 9/11. This angel is not pointing to 9/11.
Saya ni 9/11.
Can't be the second coming. Can't be the second coming.
Saya ni rani leswaro mai.
It's a bit late to investigate people at the second coming, because when he comes, his reward is with him. So this is the Sunday law that this is referring to. It's not 2014. It's this one here. Verse 41. After the first angel does his work, the third angel comes in and he speaks about this executive judgment. But his work is more complex than that. And this is, I don't want to go down this route because we don't have time and it's quite complicated. How we take this story, the arrival of the third and its empowerment, and bring that into our history. The purpose of this story that we've done 3 times now, each time extending our understanding, was to teach us one thing. The Laodicean condition is a rejection of our prophetic message. What makes it so effective? Effective for whom? Who brought us into this condition? Jezebel, Satan. He does this meeting here. What makes it so effective is that it's a combination of truth and error. And there's so much truth. 2/3 truth. One of them is what? If it's 2/3, there's 3 of them. One of them is Sunday sacredness or the Sabbath, and the immortality of the soul. He wants us to have these things. It serves his purpose. It's good. We don't mind if people die, do we? I say this respectfully. Like Paul. I'll hide behind him. It's okay if all your loved ones die. Why is it okay? Because there'll be a resurrection at the end. Holding on to the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, I mean it's rejection. Holding on to this idea that you don't accept it, it's okay to live on this earth for a long, long time. Because if you die, what happens? You're going to be okay, because sometime in the future, whenever it is, you're going to be resurrected. So we don't care about time. It's a peace and safety message.
na binakatigo na bi kakere.
The Sabbath.
Na singa tamu.
We just worship God every week.
May garap na kalu na bi malaw kede.
Everything's okay.
Do makatigo na bula.
You can work 6 days a week
Na ko na singa
and become rich,
ka utu niya.
either materially or intellectually.
Wakayamo se waka buku
We can amass a great amount of knowledge,
karanida kila lew sa buka sa ka
secular and religious.
nabi ka ni lotu nabi ka ke dengan ni bula li burungo
It's all a peace and safety message.
na ko ni tugu ni nando makatigo na bula burungo
This was carefully calculated and crafted.
ka mo na taga ba binakasaro setay
We can accept
randa ni goma
Sabbath,
na sinatamu
that the soul does not have immortality,
ni nayaro ni tamata sa anara ni bulata mundo
and everything is okay with Satan.
ka lebu na ka balit setay ni binakasaro
Because our most important mission
wala ta na nande na kibimbi
is not to worry whether your soul lives or dies.
ndapun lang ta kasi bulan na lo mo siya man
It's how to get off this planet.
sa kwaya na nanda lakota ni may na viesu siya bule burungo
Because you need to make some preparation for that to happen.
kando ni menda pa to rkin na so na kana babaraw
And in order for that to happen, you must know when that event will occur.
may nanda baka babaraw darani kilaki na profesengo mendari babaraw te kanda na ngona na babatukan kina na profesengo
And that's the one piece of information that we don't know.
ando ni tugu bimbi sanda sangati ni kila
And things are so bad in our church,
so na kaya sa vasar tinga na kana tos ko na ditos toso
not only don't we know, we don't want to know.
sengo lengan ni da sangati ni kila at di so leva me kako ni kila
We don't believe we can ever know.
sengo ni bambauta ni da na kila kasaki
This is the Laodicean condition.
naman ng bula baka leo kisia
We don't know when it's going to happen,
sengo ni kila na kana ro
but suddenly, unexpectedly,
baka sauri
Christ is going to burst through the clouds sometime.
isu na lako mai on sala bi bakuru bi tek ka bati mai na biwan lo malaki
We're a bit more sophisticated than that.
and probably usara na kana bi bakasama ndara ni wanana kina
Because we're dealing with which angel?
tadi tibu mai na kabila ni nglos
Which angel? First angel.
matai ni nglos
So the concept or the issue about time
na bi ba nana no si bakasama mbale na ngona
is not focused on the second advent, it's focused on what event?
sing itu siete ulis maro mai
On the Sunday law.
itu siete na ito na lain sadelo
We focus on the Sunday law because we're dealing with the first angel's message, even though we don't even realize it.
na bakani da tigundo ni tigo na ngona ni tugu ni matai ni nglos di na ni se lele tikina bekilaka
We know the issue,
bekila tigo na
Sunday sacredness,
watang bi sandi
but we don't know the time.
sin kilanga na kira no
And that's what's going to have to be dealt with in this history.
na nakana na garuno hindi na tambang na
How we begin to calculate and understand the sequence of events that bring us to the Sunday law.
Ando buli na kana bi lain ni tambang na mo kira bi max na ko tikan sa ramay na sadilo
And the way we do that,
ngon sa lendar ni ba torongo
the way we begin to create information,
ngon sa anda basuko na batamay na kana bi tugtugon ni profsay
is by using rules.
and ba torakina so na law menta ba muri
If you were to ask someone in this movement, what is perhaps the key passage that helps us?
nda toronga indu na le tosta sombo na tikin bol tambo daba
People,
bandita kasi bukikan na wakasan mo
people would probably go to Isaiah 28,
so ando bakina tikin bol tambo na isya wa sa kawalu
verses 10 and 13, line upon line. I think the most important passage that we should go to is not that one, But we should go to Isaiah 46 verse 10.
Na renda na tikini voltambu Aisha wasa vukaono tikine chini.
That one verse
Tikine ha
will teach us the relationship between progression and repeat and enlarge.
ana babiyo kanita kana kana toso na profession na laini bate kana tokorota kana valita.
And that's what we need to understand.
Ana ka bimbi menda kila kasati.
How to deal with progression and repeat and enlarge at the same time.
Ana nanda takata kana laini ni kana toso tiko na laini kana laini por laini. Bate kana tokorota kana tutu kana valita.
Well, when we take the principles of Isaiah 46 verse 10,
Taurana yabu kana pulili na Aisha wasa vukaono tini na vela wani moswata tubata.
it will teach us what?
Na babuli bikin na
Progression
kana toso na laini na bita mauna.
and repeat and enlarge.
Kana tokorota kana valita.
The easy one to see
Kana kararo andara ni reida.
is what?
Kana da.
Progression.
Kana toso na laini ni bita mbaba. Mbaka wala iti mana papo.
You're born,
Na sugu mai.
you're a child, you're an adult, you die.
Andasi dali matsala.
Everybody feels and experiences progression.
And laku rumah bila na prakini tambah bakini bula. Andala laku rumah andala ikas.
So this is going to teach us progression
Na wakata uli bikin dan kana
and repeat and enlarge.
toso ni ngauna ya. Kana tokorota ka valita.
So we're going to go to the time of the end
Alaku kina wakata uli ngauna tin ka bitu biso ko
and see what inspiration teaches us.
Reda da babuli bikin dan apa sini kalau.
Which verse is that?
Ingin voltam juga ya.
Daniel 11 verse 40.
Tanyala masih tin kedua tikine bahasa lagi.
And if you just read it,
Ya uli ka,
plain reading,
uli ka na,
what will it teach you?
sabe uli ka usuli bikin.
I've put it under Isaiah 46. What will it teach you?
Sabe babuli bikin.
It will teach you progression.
Kena toso na profesai.
You go to inspiration.
Nalaka na pasin kalau.
You go to the pioneer writings and they all understand one thing, the progressive nature of this verse.
Nalaka biru na pioneer. Reda sarga na kena toso na kena rara mini profesai ni biu na lain.
What will they not teach you?
Raba na sengi ni bakata buli lebih.
They will not teach you repeat and enlarge.
Sengi ni bakata buli lebih. Iko na toko ruota kena valita.
So
Repeat and enlarge.
it's taking the concept that you learned from Isaiah 46
Prometean dan dona baka sama da buli manai siapa sa bukono.
and bringing these rules into Daniel 11 verse 40.
Bita may nabilaw mo ina tanya la chin ko do sa ulo.
That gives you the ability to create new information.
Kasulibi ko na kamera niyo o reda talamay kinale mo na baka sama.
With-
Barita ko may bita na utam.
Without doing both,
Muda sinibador nabilaw ang bibiro ko.
you cannot jump from 1844 to the Sunday law.
Siya ni ron yung landi man tin ko wa basa bukawa kinalaw ni singa sandi ko.
We'll tell it as a story.
Nandan bito mo kita mo.
You walk through this history
Salamat ro man tambang ng ko.
and you notice an important event,
Kandare nandoon na kaya may makalya kina.
and the event is 1989.
Siya ko na baki tin ka di orso ka diwa.
And you speak to this waymark
Kau ko sa kina nanong ko sa nawi makbo.
and you say, can I borrow you,
Pero niyo kiri kumanda.
can I use you
Pero bang tay kumanda.
and put you on my line?
Kang biti ko nanong lain.
And the waymark says, no,
Kana wi makya siya.
I'm not going to do that.
Siya ni takaba.
Why would I want to do that?
Dapat na mula mi bakaw kina.
What's in it for me?
Dapat tipo kina niyo raw ta may kina.
What benefit will it serve me?
Dapat no raw ta may kina.
Here it is,
Siya ko yung
1989,
Yung kani orso ko kaliwa.
just wandering through history.
Dala ko ro man tambang ng ko.
We say we want to take you and we want to put you on our line.
Kanda be kauti ko kambiti ko na ito
And he's saying, I won't do it unless you give me something. Everybody wants something. So what we say to this waymark is, if you come onto our line, we'll make you famous. We'll give you something. We'll give you a new title. And then he says, that sounds good enough for me. So we take him, we bring him on our line, and we give him a new title. What do we call him? We call him the time of the end. Now, when we call him the time of the end, he thinks he's famous now. He thinks he's all good. But now he has to start doing a work for us. We tricked him. And now he becomes our servant or our slave. Now we're going to start telling him to do things that he didn't think he had to do. So he could just sit here with his new title and everything was good. But now we're going to make him do work. So what work are we going to make him do? Before we do that, we've gone to Daniel 11 verse 40. We've seen progression. We just said, oh look, there was this event here. We want to bring this event into verse 40. The event says the only way I'm going to come on is if you give me something. And we say, we'll use this rule, this law, and we'll give you a title. We'll just give you the same title that we had here. So we're going to employ repeat and enlarge to have this event here on our line. Having 1989 here on the line by itself actually doesn't even help you do anything. It serves no purpose until you give it the title. So this is where it becomes a little complex. This is when this waymark has to start doing some work. Because what we're going to do, we're going to say, now you have to stretch and compress yourself. We call that fractals. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to take you here. You are famous all by yourself, and we're going to move you. And so he's going to lose his prominence. And where's he going to have to go? He's going to have to go underneath the original time of the end. And as soon as he does that for us, now things begin to happen. So we took the concept of progression, took an event from history, put it here on our line, and it serves no purpose. It doesn't help us. So then we use repeat and enlarge to re-identify what that waymark is.
wakataon din tiki kwa. Kaya kaya nakunondon.
It has two properties.
Washiru tiko kwa.
It's unique,
Dotani.
1989,
Tinkadiwa sa ukadiwa.
and it's a copy or a repeat. Time of the end. It has two properties to it, and we need to understand both at the same time. Progression, repeat, and enlarge. All the end will look the same. So now we've got to 1989, and we want to get to the Sunday law. And we can't jump that far. So what do we need to do? Create new information. So how are we going to create new information? Now we're going to start using fractals, structures. So we'll take this line, and you can see what we're going to do. We've got 4 waymarks, we need to put one more in. Where's that going to come from? Sorry? Here it is, 1844. We're going to take the characteristics here and bring it into our line. And this becomes the waymark of 911. We created 911 because it takes on the properties and characteristics of 1844. We've created our line, which we call the line of the 144,000. Ploughing, former rain, latter rain, harvest. It's identical to this line. 1989 has 2 properties. First one, unique. Second one, copy, repeat. 1989, when it's here, which one is it? Repeat. It's here, unique. 911, here, unique. So now we've got these 2 waymarks here, which are unique waymarks on this line, but they become repeats on this line. How many waymarks have we got now? 7. So then we can take this waymark and bring it down into this one, and bring it down into this one. We've got 7 and 7. So then you go from 911 to the Sunday law, and we've just created 2 new waymarks. And what are those 2 waymarks? That's the Sunday law. Raphia, Panium. Raphia is what waymark? Midnight. And the midnight cry. So this is how we begin to create our line. Raphia is a repeat here. It becomes a unique waymark here, as is Panium. take that history and bring it down here.
Torna tukutukun tamang una ang ito puto sumay ng tulay nyo kento.
Are there two waymarks between Panem and the Sunday law?
Ito talaga nga rin na makan malyo ni penem pinalang singsan.
Sure.
Eyo.
Increase the knowledge
Karawalip tayo na buku,
and formalization,
formalization, kanaban di tayo.
or we would call it
Dari ka,
midnight cry.
kanaban tumulay ng buglip tutu.
So we're creating new information
And bulitin mo siya na itutubo,
based upon one principle
yaw tayo tigo yung doon na yaw ni bakang bauta.
that's taken from Isaiah 46 verse 10.
Kung manichigin ni bauta mo, ay siya pa sa bulkaw at ginatini.
It's the subject of repeat and enlarge,
Na utangan ni lawa, tokorwa tayo kabalip tayo.
or what we call Alpha and Omega.
Siya na ulifa, kena omega.
And it's this principle
Bakit ko guna bata tiyo? Kung na mo,
that we bring into Daniel 11 verse 40
hindi may siya mataba na tanyala, sinkang doon ka sa bulu.
to begin to create new waymarks
Kung kikianda mendang mulia siya na wimak mo,
that you can't find in inspiration.
siya nirin ko niya na bauta.
The premier one
Kung matay,
is this one here,
siya ikuang batin ka diyo, wala sa bulka diyo.
1989.
Hindi wala diwa.
Comes the time of the end,
Matao tiyo tinginaw na.
and then we drop it down as a repeat,
May tokorot tayo kinalang niya ra.
and we create a brand new line,
May dito lang kinito na line po.
the line of the
Line
144,000.
hindi doon ang rogo sa kabanong do.
And then we take these same principles,
Pero pati ba na ako ni Guling ko,
and then we can create new lines underneath this,
rin kita siya na line ni Rupo na ko.
which we call the line of the priests, Levites, and Nethinims.
Ito line ni na libay, na bet na libay, batik yan na matento siya.
In this movement,
Yan ito sa sungko,
we could carry on talking and talking forever,
dara ni bitaw natin nga ang gometang.
because it's the Word of God.
Batin ni Washington Kalo.
So there's never a convenient place to stop,
Siya nga nito doon na uno men tayo ni kina, and the dim.
because there's always more to speak about.
Kini liwsar na ka dara ni Washington.
When we do a camp meeting,
Da do kemba,
you might learn a few things,
dara ni buli na shonka.
but I think the biggest reason for coming to a camp meeting is to be encouraged,
Ano man ni kabibim na wala may na tiguwa kemba men daw walong gagat.
to be enlightened.
And rani para ramataki.
Often we don't learn that much.
Kapag bunga siya ni daw huli na sa relief na ka.
I mean true learning,
And huli din sa.
because there's just too much information and not enough time.
Yung kaya ni Sando, liwsar na tuku-tuku dan bande uda kaya nalaga-laga ni no.
So if you feel that you've learned a few things,
So nanuman ka ni Sando sa mataw sa huli na rawa.
but it's all still confusing,
Si Vile na kiti ko nung tora rawa.
that you're writing all these things down in your notes,
So wala timbuan na namoy wala.
when you go home this evening, you look at them and they won't make any sense.
So ngayon boy bala na kami ni kuha ng rede ni makasya sa November bali.
Don't be distressed.
Kapon niyo loma bibikin.
It's quite normal.
Viruroti ba yan naman.
If you just took a picture of this
Rede na yalan ko.
or took notes,
Kaya naman nung wala ti ko na tuku-tuku.
and then you were asked to explain what you learnt here, it'd be very difficult for most people.
Yung kanitero ni mo pamatawata ka na bilay niyo mo ang bote ni na biyandrende ito walay.
It's in studying these truths for yourselves
Bote ni na may buli na nabi di nataleng ko na buli na matama ng dua. May kaya na pa kaya dua.
and going into detail and filling in the gaps that I've left. That's where you learn.
Para niyo buli na ka pakaturuma sa nabi tuku-tuku. Nanong buli na makaiko. Naran niyo pakaturuma na bilay niyo mo.
I want to encourage us all
Kaiko kinakalo. Palo nga gati kanda.
to be serious about personal study.
Nanda turo ba bimbi na nanda uli na ko sinakalo nanda uli na bakayan do bakaikan.
To be serious about coming together and studying together.
Turo ba bimbi talaga nanda do may uli lesson ni bata.
The dynamic that we have at a camp meeting like this
Ndo na natangala si kan bimbi nanda do uli na bang nanda na sa tinikiang babango.
that I speak and you listen
Yung daw pamatalan ka, yung daw barurongo.
is not a good learning environment.
Siyang suit sa rin doon na bakarong libuli na.
If this is what your Sabbaths look like, you're doing something wrong.
Yung kaya batin po sa nareda ni huli, nangauna ni daw sinatamo katikina, mabuti ni talati ba.
There's a time to present,
Doon nangauna namin daw takakina na ibang matala.
but most of our time should be discussion and studying together.
Lebusar nangauna namin daw huli batikina, nandaw daw biwasi.
That way we learn together.
Doon ang munisal binakin ni nonda huli ba.
So please be encouraged.
Nandra mo ni walong ng bataki.
Hopefully you've learned a few new things this camp meeting.
Kita ka ni huli la siya nakabinakan na kiyamugo.
But we still have a lot more to understand. We're at the beginning of our new dispensation. Expect new light, new tests, new challenges to come before us. Our last dispensation was 5 years. The next one, the maximum it will be 2 years. We don't know from month to month, so it can be a lot shorter than that. I want us to consider that the final events really are becoming more and more rapid. We're soon to come to the increase of knowledge and then to the formalization of this dispensation. And unless you're paying attention, the events will come so quickly you'll miss them. It's almost certain that the increase of knowledge and the formalization will have occurred before you and I meet again. Hopefully not before APS come and visit again. It's my hope that all of you will be here next time I come. And that none of us have fallen into the wicked world below. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness. We've come to the end of this camp meeting and we want to give you praise and thanks for all that you've done for us. As we meditate upon the thoughts and ideas of the many presentations that we've had, the private and group discussions that we've engaged in, it's my prayer that my brothers and sisters here have been strengthened and have been encouraged to take up their work and press forward. We thank you that you have blessed us this week. Help us to take heed to the counsel that you give. And may each of us remain faithful and true. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.